So I would like now to introduce Professor Steve Florian, who is our Writing and Communications professor, and there's some of his top fans in the back. So think positive, act positive.
That's it. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Welcome. We're going to practice a little bit of interpersonal communication tonight.
Excuse me,
Based on my title. Yes.
some of us are a little hard of hearing, so be sure you use a voice that carries, thank you.
Or a microphone.
I forgot my earpieces
No
tonight.
problem. If you can't hear me, give me one of those and I'll boost it up a little bit. So, I'm going to start off with this little handout here. We don't have time really to read the whole thing, but just give it a brief skim in terms of our categories here. This is an article that I got from the Guardian, and this person sort of professes to be an expert on the handshake. And we get sort of 10 versions of the handshakes in here: the sweaty palms, the dead fish, the brush off, the controller, the politician, the finger vice. You know what the finger vice is? It is grab your fingers, don't actually shake your hand. The bone crusher. I think we all know what the bone crusher probably is, right? The lobster claw, the hand wrestler, and then the teacups. I will say one sort of caveat in terms of this list is that this person declined to put in what a good handshake looked or acted like, which I find a little weird. But we use these 10 categories as just sort of a jump off for this thing that I call the handshake test. I should have showed you that already.
Too late.
What?
Too late.
It is too late, isn't it? I don't know if I want to give too much away yet. I'm going to hold off on that. So, just sort of think about this a little bit. To do this handshake test, I need 2 volunteers. Yes.
No volunteer.
Yes. Come on up. Come on up. This is something that we do in our business communication class, and I make everyone in the class do it. They have no idea who they're going to be interacting with. So I give them a business card. This is your business card. This is your business card. In terms of the scenario, we're just going to pretend that it's a networking situation, right? So you work for company A, you work for company B, you were sent here to network, right? So in terms of these interactions, it's just sort of that initial networking moment when you have to go meet someone that you don't know, right? So a minute, 2 minutes, tell each other who you are, who you work for. You can make up a company or whatever you want, right? Whatever you're interested in. Or you could say what you actually do. And a little interaction about why you're here, and then you need to end it and get out of it. So, very brief.
With the handshake.
Well,
Bone
it
crusher
starts with-
or,
Well,
no,
we'll get to that.
We're not doing handshake.
What's that?
We're not doing handshake, we're just.
You are doing a handshake.
We are
So,
doing a handshake.
okay,
that's the beginning of the scenario, okay?
We think so.
okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll do.
Hi, I'm Judith.
I'm David.
Well, it's nice to meet you, David. And what do you do?
I work right down at the high school, actually.
You work where?
At Ketchikan High School.
Oh, okay. Well,
But I normally don't wear a hat and look like this when I work, but yes. What about yourself?
I work out the Marine Highway System out north, and I do piano teaching.
Okay.
I've been doing that for a long time. How long have you been at the high school?
Several years now.
Okay, so are you a Ketchikan resident?
I am.
For a long time?
I was born and raised here.
Okay.
How about yourself?
Well, I came here in 1964,
Okay.
and been here ever since. I like Ketchikan, so I consider it home,
And
yeah.
I don't know how to play the piano, which is why we probably haven't met, I guess.
Right. I've only been teaching for 50 years, so, you know, but between Buffalo, New York, and here, that's where my teaching is.
Okay.
So, but your last name, you look very familiar.
Mitchell?
Okay, Don Mitchell.
There you go.
Okay, that's why I know who you are.
Yep.
Okay.
Typical Ketchikan.
Yeah, right. So we know each other. So I
Yeah.
guess we can say so long and good luck. And,
Yeah.
it's nice
Oh,
to say
and
hello.
here's my
And
business card if you'd
business
like.
card for you too. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for the smile.
You guys can stand right next to each other. What would you say about David's handshake?
It was firm, and I felt like he was
What?
genuine and firm.
Hmm? And I'm sorry, tell me your name again?
Genuine?
No, your name.
Oh, Judith.
Judith. What do you think about Judith's handshake?
It was firm and warm, welcoming.
Hmm? Based on this interaction, do you think that you would have sort of continue to pursue a professional relationship with David?
I would.
Why?
He has a pleasant demeanor and presentation, and I like his handshake.
I want to learn how to play the piano, so I can. Yeah, of course. Just very friendly and open, and beat me to the questions, so she's interested in. So.
Beat you to the question?
She was good at asking questions before I could come up with one.
I would agree with you.
Yeah.
Excellent, almost, right? That-
Yeah. Very quick to.
All right,
think of
good.
something.
What is your assessment of this interaction? Why bravo?
I'm just very earnest
It seemed,
and direct
I would
and
agree with you.
personal, and the whole body language, eye connection, yeah.
well, let's go back to the body language.
Um,
How would you assess the body language in this scenario?
There was a bit of, there was, seemed like a little bit too much space.
Yes.
Yeah. Like it was a reach almost to shake. You didn't step, I mean, there was the intimacy in a way in the exchange, but they didn't step towards each other. It wasn't as a smooth transition, yeah.
On the other hand, the scenario that they're playing out is that they're strangers. And I would be leery of a stranger who stood too close to me right off the bat when I hadn't even shaken their hand,
Yes?
even if it was a business thing. So I thought that the space between them was probably pretty appropriate.
What do you think?
I think they did a good job, especially, under the circumstances of being up there in front of the crowd and everything like that. So they probably didn't act quite as naturally as they normally do.
It's probably true. Anyone else want to weigh in on this? This side of the room is eerily quiet on our handshake. Yes?
I would have been interested in seeing how they would have been if there had been a bunch of other people like there would be in a business networking situation. If they would have been closer, because you can't hear people.
We're going to get to that. The environmental factors play a huge role in terms of how we conduct our interpersonal communication events, right? And so this is sort of a idealized scenario in terms of that, right? But if you are in one of these, a meeting, a large group, whatever it is, there's going to be noise, there's going to be people, the space is going to be compressed, right? And so it's going to change how this event would have happened. If we took this event and took exactly the same dialogue and the same scenario and then placed it in a room crowded with people and food and alcohol and music in the background, even though they may have the same exact dialogue happening, the entire communication event is going to be different. Mostly affected by the environment, right? Okay, you're released. Excellent job. Oh, wait. Swag.
Oh, prizes.
A toothbrush?
No. No, you did. That's a nice combo pen.
Oh, right. Thank you.
You don't seem like a sticker person, so. And
I'm a
sticky
sticker
notes.
person.
Do you stick
Yeah, just the sticky notes.
Oh, sticky notes or stickers?
Oh, sticky notes.
Sticky note bowl.
Very
Thank you.
perfect.
You don't need another pen. So we do this in the class, everyone has to do it. So 12 pairs, all kinds of crazy things start to happen. One of the things that happens often in terms of these situations is the spacing issue, right? Where we start to understand in a very real way, that there are expectations and a lot of unwritten rules in terms of these types of communication events. You could say that why we use this handshake test, it does multiple things in terms of, we do it at the very beginning of the semester. So everyone's uncomfortable, no one knows each other. By the time this is through, we all have a sense of who these people are in our class. We get to know their names. We start to build a sense of community in the class, especially if someone does something goofy or crazy. One time, one of my students kept backing up. They were talking, and she kept taking a step back and a step back. She backed herself all the way into a corner, but she didn't realize she was doing it, right? So sometimes, nerves take over, and this also can inform how we are going to sort of participate in these types of communication events, right? There's a lot happening, and a lot of what happens is response to stimuli, too, right? So we have our task, we know what we want to say and do, but there's all sorts of other things that we don't necessarily account for. It takes 100 milliseconds to start to form judgments. The other thing that happens in these events is that, like it or not, we start to form judgments about people very quickly. These judgments may or may not be true, but what is true is that we all do it. And then we start to form opinions about these people. And, there's a saying that you only get one chance to make a good first impression, right? Well, unfortunately, in a lot of ways, this is true. And so let's just take the sweaty palm handshake, for instance. Has anyone ever shook hands with someone that has the sweaty palm? What's your initial response when it happens?
Ew.
You don't know what's happening. You don't know it's coming. It happens, and you're repulsed, right? Well, if you're a professional person, you can't let that happen. It depends on the context of the situation. If this person, if we're talking about power dynamics at work too, if someone, if there's a great power distance and you're here and that person's here, you can't do that. If you're trying to build relationships and you want to do business with this person, even though they have the sweatiest, oiliest palm in North America, if you want to do the deal, you can't pull back. You can't give it you can't flinch. You can't even wipe your hand on your pants after it's over. Because that person knows they have the sweaty palm, right? So in these instances, in terms of making choices, if you know that this is a possibility, if you've sort of prepped yourself in terms of these events and being a professional, well, you can do something about it. You can make choices, right? And so if that person knows that they're the sweaty palm person, and you shook their hand, and you didn't flinch, and you didn't wipe your hand on your pants, and you kept progressing, their estimation of you is going to change quickly, right? And so these are rhetorical strategies that we talk about in these business communication classes. How do you get through these events? These things are tough. When you don't know people, a lot of people have social anxieties that just really sort of cripple them in these scenarios. But if you start to talk about it, if you start to break these things down and talk about what's happening in these communication events, start to be able to read what's happening, whether it's verbal, nonverbal, your power and your sense of control in these situations climbs rapidly. You become a much more effective communicator. And you get to sort of attend to the list of things that you wanted to accomplish in these events. So if it's your job to make new contacts for the business, this is a place where you can excel. Doing these types of things and doing presentations are the two things that people want to do the least. But if you're good at them, your value to that organization just skyrockets, right? So these are the things that we work on. And, we look at this list as just sort of here's some of the possibilities, right? But it's also a way to start training you to think about how you want to act in these communication events. This is the other thing that we didn't really get to. Well, we sort of did a little bit, but you know, you have your task in these events, right? You have a job to do. But there's still a level of audience awareness that you need to pay attention to, too. So you did your job, you got through your script, you made the contacts you needed. But then if you have to think, well, what does this person think of me? We can't always know that, but we can make some guesses, and as much as we can have a sense of who that person is, if we can before the event, if not, in these quick judgments that we're making, if these judgments are informed from a place of sort of this positive realm of communication, you're going to be much better off.
2 more volunteers.
We need 2 more volunteers.
Do it again.
You can't go again. You did a great job. Oh, yes. I got one.
I'll go.
Man in the yellow shirt, come forward.
Oh, come on, Brad.
You know I can fight.
Okay, let's flip to the back page. So I gave you 2 articles that we use that, how to negotiate first handshakes. We'll read that later. All right, let's stand right here. Now, we're going to do the type B test. We're going to make some guesses about these 2 people right here. All right? So, question 1. Where does this person work? If you know, don't say the answer. But if you had to guess, where would you say? Wait, Brett and
Judith,
Judith.
another.
2 Judiths. This is
2
great.
Judiths.
So easy to remember. Where does Brett work?
Brett.
He's a laborer on the dock.
Works on the dock. Where does Brett work?
Louder.
Well, he's at this event, so he's a nerd, so he's a professional somewhere, right?
Nurse. He's probably a nurse.
No, a nerd, she said.
Where does Brett work? Nolan, where does he work?
I like the idea of the dock.
He might be,
Hey Steve, we're
Yes.
having trouble hearing you back here. Can you project a little
yes.
bit?
Where does Judith work? If you know where Judith works, don't answer. I know where she works.
Everybody.
Where does Judith work?
At the university.
She works at, she look like a professor, or is she running the show?
Maybe running the show.
You might be.
So bad.
Anybody else want to hazard a guess? What?
Jewelry store.
Where does Brett shop? This could either be groceries,
A&P.
clothes. He shops at A&P? Anyone else disagree with that? Anyone think he's a Safeway guy?
Yeah, I say
No, definitely.
Safeway? Safeway. One Safeway, one A&P. Where does Judith shop?
Tatsudas.
Where? Tatsudas. You know that for a fact?
There's something about it that just, I shop at that suits, I don't know what it is.
Take a guess. What makes you think that?
Seen her every time you go there?
Tell me one reason why you think that's true.
Just an impression.
Well, he thinks it. There's something motivating it, right? Married or unmarried? Is this guy married? No?
Yes.
Ooh. There you go. Oh, yes. Is Brett married?
Yes.
He's married. Is Judith married?
Yep.
Yes. We know Judith.
Anyone think Judith's single?
We all know her.
We all know her.
I don't know her marital status, and I would say yes, she's married.
Why do you think that?
Because she appears settled. Like secure in her place in life. And I think a big part of that has to do with feeling secure about your partnerness.
All right. What kind of car does Brett drive?
A truck.
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 SUV.
Oh, that's so funny.
Subaru.
An electric car.
Electric car, ooh. What does Judith drive?
Subaru.
Subaru?
A Yaris. A Toyota Yaris. Or no, is that a Toyota? I don't know.
Yes, it is, yours.
A Yaris.
I used to have a Subaru.
Okay.
And the Yaris is close.
Is it?
Is Judith a dog
Figure
person or a
psychic.
cat person?
Cat.
Is Brett a dog person or a cat person?
Dog.
Dog.
Does Brett have a college degree?
Yes.
Yes.
Anyone think he doesn't? What happened to the
Yeah.
dock workers? Do you do a college degree to work on the dock?
He's an educated dock worker.
Awesome.
Does Judith have a college degree?
Yes.
Anyone think she doesn't?
Why?
I don't know.
What does Judith do
Because you're a
for,
nerd and you
Because
do
Okay.
what does Judith do in her leisure time?
Read. Knit.
Reading, knitting,
So,
Yeah, something about
Quilts.
crafts that comes across.
crafting, right?
Yeah.
the sweater.
For real?
Sweater?
Go to meetings.
Go to
Meetings.
meetings, there you go.
What does Brett do in his leisure time?
Hike.
Oh, he's a hiker, big hiker. What else?
fish.
Soccer.
Walk his dog.
Soccer, dog walker. Did anyone get anything right in terms of who you are?
Pretty darn, just about 100%.
Just
Really?
Yes.
the
What about you?
The animals.
No, that's right, I don't like, I mean, I'm not a cat person at all. I'm a dog person.
Dog person. Oh, we got
Yeah.
that part wrong.
Yeah, but that's
What do
really
you
about
drive?
it. Oh, I used to have a Subaru, and I don't actually own a car right now.
Oh, do you shop at Tetsuda's
I shop at Tatsudas.
exclusively?
Well, sometimes I shop at A&P, but never at Safeway, ever. Because they are not community oriented, and I won't support them.
Okay. What do we get wrong about you?
I'm cats and dogs. I don't discriminate.
Cats and dogs, do you work on a dock?
I do not work on a dock. I'm an engineer.
Docks. Oh, he's a nerd.
I'm an engineer.
Yeah.
I work for myself.
Okay, listen. With all the swag we got left, I think you're gonna enjoy it. I think you're both sticker people.
You pick.
You probably like
I
that.
like
You like that one?
Yeah.
This is to wrap your cord around like
No, I don't need one
earbuds.
of those.
You'll like that.
No, I don't want that.
No lanyards?
I don't want that one. Okay.
You take that one.
Way to go, Doc Burger.
What did we learn in this little event?
Thank you.
You're subtle.
Yeah, settled.
Are you settled?
Yes,
Lots of judgments.
and I used to be in charge of this library long ago.
Wow. What did we learn?
We project a lot about ourselves without even realizing it.
Yes. Well, how does that happen?
The uniform you wear.
Body language,
Some of it's body language.
verbalization,
Appearance.
appearance, yeah.
Appearance is a large part of it. Identity is constructed. We construct our identities. I mean, if you think about it, all the clothes you wear, right, you chose them all, likely, unless your parents are still dressing you, which I don't think is happening, probably, right? And so, we choose who cuts our hair. We make decisions about our hairstyles. When we go buy glasses, we say, oh, which ones are gonna fit my face? Which one is gonna make me look smarter than I actually am? We do, even in terms of color choices, we're constructing our identity through all these choices. So when you go out into the world, people read you, they read you as a text, really. Now, they may not know they're doing it, but they're doing it. We just did it. And so again, in these interpersonal communication events, there's a lot of stimulus that's there at work at all times. And so if we know that, we can make some more informed choices about how we're going to respond or interact with other people. We also know that they are then reading us. They may not be aware of it, but we know that they're doing it, right? So we read people as texts, essentially. So really what we're doing in these situations is inductive reasoning. So deductive reasoning means you're trying to get at what is actually true, that real thing, right? The nice part about inductive reasoning is that it only has to be probably true. It's the way to build arguments. You start to try and get at what's happening in the world through inductive reasoning. You do it all day long in terms of how you get through the world every day, right? The problem in terms of inductive reasoning is that sometimes you look at that as sort of concrete thinking. It's not meant to be that. It's like if you were a detective and you walked onto the crime scene or some event that happened that you need to sort out what happens, even if it's a traffic accident. That sounds like a hazmat situation. Are you some sort of top secret agent that we need to know about?
Yes, he is.
He
He's
looks
a
one, doesn't
spy.
he?
100%.
We type in.
I bet he could tell us what's inside Area 51.
You're so right.
Personal experience.
Good inductive reasoning.
So, in terms of these inductive reasoning, if you're the police officer and you walk into this crime scene, that's all you got to work with. You start to, what we do with inductive reasoning is we take what's actually in front of us. You can only really use what is actually here to start building these arguments, to get at what's probably true. After you work through it long enough, you can then get to the deductive and say, this is what actually happened. So if we want to think about interpersonal communications as a bridge that connects people, that's probably a much more productive way to think about it. But we're the ones building the bridge. Choices we make determine the personal, interpersonal relationships and the outcomes that follow. So the better we are at communicating, the better our relationships are going to be. But it takes a lot of self-awareness to get to that level of sort of control about how you communicate with other people. You always have choices in terms of how you communicate. So if we want to be good communicators, we got to work at it. In personal communication, it's always dynamic. It's constantly changing, it's in flux, it's progressing, sometimes regressing, but never static. So, in terms of these events, the receiver, the sender and the receiver of the messages in these dyadic scenarios is always changed in terms of the event, right? So, all the stimuli is falling around. You are never not changed in these events. So, also, if you are aware of that, you can sort of manage yourself in these events. Communication is the process through which people use messages to generate meanings within and across contexts, cultures, channels, and media. This is an important thing to remember too, because so much of how you communicate with people is informed by culture. So you have to be willing to examine what culture or cultures, it's likely multiple cultures. Sometimes you're part of the larger hegemonic culture, the culture that's sort of in control, wherever that may be, right? Sometimes you're involved in these micro-cultures that are sort of lower level status in terms of the larger cultures. And it's always going to inform how you communicate. So you have to be willing to challenge some of these inherent biases that are that come through by way of culture. Whether it's your culture at home, whether it's a religious culture, work cultures, they're putting a lot of pressure on how you communicate with people, for better or worse. So the message is the package of information, right, that we send. These communication events are always socio-historically contextual, meaning that they happen always in a very specific time, a very specific place, and if you change that time or place, You change the event, you change the information. You may not change, you could go script to script, but how people are going to process that information is going to be different. There's a woman named Christy Fleckenstein who came up with this idea about body rhetoric. And her theory is that no matter where you are in the world, how you are positioned, physically positioned in the world, determines your worldview. So if all this, if someone said to you, oh, what did you guys do on Thursday night? Oh, we went to the UAS library. And we watched a presentation on interpersonal communication. You could make the assumption that everyone had the same experience in this event, right? But if I gave you all a piece of paper and said, I want you to write 4 or 5 paragraphs about what happened, how you process this event, I doubt that anyone would have the same story. And if I said to you, oh, well, tell me what the room looked like, and tell me who was sitting next to you, and again, we would all have different stories, because we are all positioned differently in this physical space. So these events are always socio-historically contextual. So the channel is the sensory dimension along which the communicators transmit information, channels. They can be auditory, visual, tactile, olfactory, oral. Sometimes it's linear communication, right? Sometimes the information is just flowing in one direction. There's a sender, you throw out the information, you're not quite sure who's going to receive the information, but you're probably not super worried about that. In terms of these things, environmental noise can affect how you process that information too. So it could be the noisy room. It could be sort of visual distractions that can't let you sort of take in all that information. Or we're always sort of distracted by things. I mean, even if you were one of those people where I do this a lot sometimes too, where I'm talking to someone and they'll tell me their name and I can't remember their name because I'm so busy sort of reading that person. I'm not trying to do it on purpose, but I'll never forget people's faces, but I so often forget their names because I'm sort of trying to take in who they are as a human being instantly and probably making decisions about whether or not I trust this person off the bat. You know, when I should probably be saying, oh, well, I gotta remember this person's name because when I run into him again, I'm going to want to, hey, Judah, how's it going, right? So the noise can come in a lot of different ways. So if you know that noise can be a thing that affects your interpersonal communications, well, you can sort of make adjustments for that. Interactive communication involves senders and receivers, influenced by feedback and fields of experience. So the feedback, verbal, nonverbal messages, indicates a reaction to the message. Fields of experience, it's the history and experience that people bring to communication events. This is another thing that's sort of important to remember too, that we come to every communication event that we participate in loaded with information, loaded with experience, right? And so we come into these events and we think, oh, well, I don't know what to say to that person. I don't know anything about them. What are they going to think of me, right? But really, we come into these events so backloaded with expectations too, often, right? And worries, but also tasks, right? And then we start to think, well, there's probably a part of your brain that starts processing every other networking event that you've ever participated in your life. Some went good, some went bad. But these things are all firing around in there, right? So it's not just you coming in with your script. This is affecting you too. And so sometimes it can make things better, and sometimes it can make things go poorly. So if we know these things about ourselves, great, we can make choices. But if we know that this is true for everyone, then even when things start to fall apart for the other person, or you see your communication event going off the rails for the other person, you can do something about it. It depends on how badly you want to maintain this relationship. Have you had that experience ever?
Never.
Well,
I'm being facetious.
certainly in marital relationships, right? It's like there's a lot at stake every single day, right? And so you have to sort of stay in the ring, right? And sort it out. Whereas sometimes in public places or even in work events, sometimes you can sort of skate out of these things if you want to. But there are times when the stakes are high, and there's sort of strong reasons why you need to hang in there. And so if you know this, you can make choices. You can make better choices. We sort of talked about this already. The interpersonal communication, it's always dyadic, right? You always need two people for the interpersonal. Intrapersonal is talking to yourself. Anybody here talk to themselves?
Yeah.
There's some hands. Yeah, it definitely has its place, right? Another thing to think about in terms of these interpersonal communications too is this I-thou concept. If you can keep your communication events in an I-thou realm, it means that at all times you're considering the humanity of the other person. You consider them a human being as sort of in equal status to yourself. And if this is true, you're going to hang in there. You're going to attend to that person in ways that you wouldn't if you weren't functioning that way. It's incredibly empowering, right? If you fall into this I-it realm, then you got problems. Because if you're functioning in the I-it realm, if you're a person who needs to be who needs power, right? If you want to be in charge all the time and be right all the time, then you're probably going to function in this I-it realm. And the way to do that is to dehumanize the other person in some way, shape, or form. It could be big, it could be small. Microaggressions are a great way to dehumanize people and not get caught. And they start to pile up. But what we know in terms of this I-it realm is when you start to dehumanize people or to sort of put them in realms that are less than you, what you're really doing is dehumanizing yourself.
Can you give some examples of I-thou versus I-it?
Well, I-thou, if you're functioning in an I-thou, you're probably a very empathetic person, right? You're probably also using we language instead of you language. So if you're having sort of troubled communication events, and someone transcribed the event, and you realize, oh, every time I want to make my point, I keep using this you language. You. You did this. You did this to me. Well, if this is a dyad, you are both involved in this relationship equally. And so if you're using you language, you are trying to put that person in the it realm, reduce their status in relationship to you, right? So if you keep it in the I-thou, you're being empathetic. If you get it into this it, you, so the opposite of the you realm is the we, right? So if you could have that same conversation with someone and replace the you did this, with we language. We are having this problem. It shows that you're also taking equal responsibility for whatever the issue is in this communication event. If it's problematic, certainly if it's problematic, it's a much better way to function. Because you're saying that you're equally invested in the solution. And that you're putting out language that the other person should be equally invested in the solution also. You're also giving them space to be equally invested in the solution. If you're using you language, you're diminishing that person and you're taking away that space for them to come together with you or to have any sort of equal footing in solving or sorting this problem or even ever engaging in this relationship going forward. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
This is the biggest thing that happens in that I-it realm. You gain this sense of false power. Do you know anybody who is a truth teller? I tell the truth. People don't want to have a conversation with me because if they do, I'm going to tell the truth. Anybody know anybody like that? What's the problem with that sort of line of thinking or that mode of communication? Truth teller. I only tell the truth. You want to talk to me? You're going to get the full truth. Both barrels. What's the problem?
They're not going to listen to you.
Yes, you're going to get that person's version of the truth. Number one. Who else said? Somebody else say something?
They're not going to listen to what you have to say. That is a one-way.
It's a very good possibility that they're going to shut down, right? In terms of that type of communication too, the problem is that the truth tellers.
People don't really care about the truth.
Well, what they don't care about is what the other person thinks or feels.
Yeah.
They're not considering their audience or their partner in this communication event. They're only concerned with themselves and how they're viewing the world, right, in this instance. Which takes you out of the dyad, takes you out of the I-thou realm, and puts you squarely in the I-it. So when people say that, I'm a truth teller, they want to sort of position themselves as a higher version of a human being than you because they're bold and brave enough to only tell the truth. But look, yes, we are supposed to always tell the truth, right? But there are many instances in terms of that person that you're communicating with that you know that the truth is going to be incredibly hurtful to them or damaging to them. Or sometimes there's just information that other person doesn't necessarily need to know. Well, that's up to you to make those decisions in those moments. And that's why these events are always contextual. They're always situational and they're always contextual. Now the upside with that is you always have the chance to make the choice. The downside is that you always have to make a choice. You always have to be self-reflective in these moments. It's a lot of work. And it's probably why people falter in terms of these communication events sometimes, because maybe they don't have the energy to be that empathetic or to be that self-reflective in these moments. Maybe the majority of the time they do, but every once in a while you're probably going to slip up, right? Happens in family events, I think, probably more than anywhere else, right? Where you just sort of run out of energy and patience, right? And then you feel like a terrible person when it's over. But it happens. It happens to everyone. And it's incredibly difficult to keep this up at all times. But it's a practice. These sort of behaviors are repeatable. So the good news is we always have a choice in terms of how we communicate. So if we make it part of our practice, choose wisely in terms of how we're communicating, I think you're going to see that your relationships with people will improve. Even relationships that are good relationships. You could say, oh, wow, I feel like our relationship is getting better. Well, it's probably because you've sort of moved into this mindful state about how you choose to communicate with people in your life, whether it's personal, whether it's work. Even if you choose not to choose, you're still making a choice, right? So you might as well choose a positive choice. So in terms of these, what we end up trying to do in this class, or these classes, is to build interpersonal communication competence, right? So we always have to think about, well, what's appropriate, what's effective, what's ethical. This is always contextual too. Communication skills, repeatable, goal-directed behaviors, behavioral patterns that you routinely practice. So it's moving these events out of the unconscious into a conscious level, right? And so when that happens, we start to gain agency in terms of being better communicators. Oh man, that's it. That's it. Do you have any questions, concerns?
I'll turn lights up for questions.
Yes,
Do you have the PowerPoint for that paper?
I can make it available. Can I make this PowerPoint available to people? How would I do that?
We can send it out on our email list. We could,
If you give me your email, I'll send it to you. How about that?
Can you go back to the last slide real quick? You know, one of the challenges with teaching students is getting them to be reflective but not overly critical, where it stagnates their growth, or they're too rigid, not able to behave naturally. I don't know, like there's if you start self-monitoring is the word you
Teaching
use.
students to think critically and be self-effective is incredibly difficult.
Recommendations, Professor?
You know what's a great tool? Is that, do you know about the New York Times Learning Network? New York Times puts, they have this section that's called the Learning Network. And one of the things that they do every week during the school year is they put out a thing called, what's going on in this picture? And they'll post up a picture, and they won't tell you what's actually happening in the image until the end of the week. I've used this in classes before. What's great about it is you have to use critical thinking, you have to use inductive reasoning to try and make arguments about what's going on. And so if you do this on a weekly basis, like if you started your Monday, every Monday, everybody knew this is how we're going to start the week, right? They have to make all these arguments, they have to think about it, and they can stew on it for the entire week because they're not going to find out what's actually happening till the end of the week or the beginning of next week, right? And so it builds a practice of looking longer, looking harder, building inductive arguments on a weekly basis to where it starts to become embodied. And once you can get it to that level, it's transferable to anything. You can stick them on Shakespeare and give them a sonnet, and they can look at that sonnet in the same way they look at that image and say, what's really going on here? You know, Shakespeare, for many people, especially high school students, can be very difficult. But the longer you look at it, also social constructivist theory tells us too that if we're in learning situations that are social, knowledge production happens faster, and they retain more knowledge if students are trying to build knowledge socially. If you put them in these sort of isolated realms, that's when people start to shut down, and they get quiet, right? And they sort of give up. But if they're in social, if they're working in groups, well, they have to interact with each other, right? And so, even if you're a student that doesn't want to talk in class, if you can get that student to talk in a small group and participate in a small group, they will eventually become confident enough to communicate in the larger class. It might take a while, but you're building in small steps. And so investigating those images is a great way to get them to start thinking about critical thinking and to really sort of dig in. And if you're doing it as a class, it's happening socially. They start to hear how other people are thinking about it, and it sort of builds these pathways for them to start thinking in a more critical way that they had never considered before. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I guess I was thinking the transfer from, the unconscious to the conscious level. When that takes place, then people become more aware, like they are critical. They do gain those skills in critical thinking. But then it can be they're kind of too aware, or people can become too aware, I guess, where they are too critical. I don't know how to ask that appropriately.
Well, that's tough because, it's like giving a kid a garden hose and turning it on full blast, right? And it's spraying all over the place, right? Well, and if you give the fireman the hose, that's a lot more powerful, he can put it on a dime, right? And boom, 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 right? And so you're like, well, how do I get this person to move from that water wiggle to more sort of targeted approach, right? I think it just takes practice and mentoring and sort of templates in terms of how to do it, right? I think they will eventually get to it, but it is difficult. It's a difficult thing to sort of control, right? And the hard part is you don't want to control your students in these ways. You want them to have agency in terms of their knowledge production. But you have to sort of shepherd them to a certain degree without sort of overly controlling what they're doing, right? It's a very difficult balance.
So in your class, you go through a lot of modeling and template stuff and.
I think you have to. I think it's the only way to do it. And then once they use these models and templates in the beginning, right, at a certain point, they won't need them anymore. They'll just stop using them because they can do it on their own. Good question?
Yes, you were talking about, with David, the image. And okay, so I'm doing one-on-one teaching with my piano.
Yes.
And I have students that don't want to communicate, that are very shy. So when I have them look at a page of music and I say, what do you see? And there's nothing. They come, they just sit there and stare.
Let me ask you this question. When you're showing that page of music, have they heard the music at this point, or are they just looking at the notes on the page?
They're just looking at, they haven't heard it, no.
Okay. So if you said, okay, I'm going to show you this piece of music, and they look at it and nothing comes up for them, right? What would happen then if you played that song for them?
Okay, what I want them to see is the structure of the music, not the sound. But I want them to see the structure of two stabs, two clef signs, key signature, time signature. I want them to see the physical, just what's on the page.
I would suggest to you that you play the music for them.
Play it.
You sit there with them and you play the music, and maybe you play it 2 times or 3 times, and maybe you spend an entire session listening to that song, right? What will happen then is that student will start to embody that music. Sometimes it's more important how you feel about a concept than what you think about it. Because if you really think about it, you make choices about what you think about something in terms of how you feel about it before how you think about it. One of the first ways that we process information is, how does it make me feel, right? If you sort of check yourself all day long, I think you would notice that you probably do that more often than you ever realized. And so if you say, oh, well, this music makes me feel a certain way, or if you can feel the structures happening in that music. I know how to buy music. I don't know how to play it. But I also know that when I hear something that I really like, or I hear something that I can feel the structures of it in it, and it moves me in some way, what I'm doing is connecting that music to something somewhere that I already know. But if they're looking at that page of music, it's too abstract for them. There's no way for them to connect that page of music, written page of music, with anything they know. The way we generate knowledge is we take abstract concepts and we connect it to something that we know. There's a theory about threshold concepts that the only way that you generate new knowledge is that you take abstract principles, connect it to prior knowledge, and once you can connect that abstract idea to prior knowledge, then it crosses this threshold. The threshold that it crosses is from the short-term memory into the long-term memory. And once it's in the long-term memory, you never forget it. It's always there. And so as long as it's in the short-term memory, it's troublesome knowledge. But just because it's troublesome only means that you need to problematize it more and agitate it more until it connects to some sort of prior knowledge. Once that happens, it can cross the threshold into permanent knowledge, right? Knowledge construction. So my guess is that it's too abstract for them in this form. But one thing we know about music is that it's universal, right? And that you usually decide how you're not usually making intellectual choices about music. You're making choices about how it makes you feel, and then you respond to it. Would you agree with that? That would be my guess. Anything else? Did we do it? I think we did. Thank you guys for coming out.